students, it's Mrs. Nice again. I'm going to be reading you 27.2, What Was the Renaissance? Before I read this, it's always a good idea if you're given questions, which you have been, to read them before, look over the questions before you read the chapter, just so that as you're reading, it's helping guide your mind, you know what you're looking for. So on our questions, you can see that we are now in section 2. Part 1 says, fill in the cause and effect chart below to explain how the classical world of ancient Greece and Rome was rediscovered, leading to the period known as the Renaissance. So we have 3 causes here. Cause, in the late Middle Ages, merchants and crusaders brought back, and you're going to type in right here what they brought back. Another cause, the Roman Catholic Church kept knowledge of ancient times alive by, and then you'll type in right here, what did the church do to keep knowledge of ancient times alive? Our third cause, Europeans also read classical works that came by way of, all right, where did they get these classical works from, or how did they get these classical works? You'll type that in here. And then right here, effect, the flow of ideas led to, and then you type what this led to right here. So remember when you are typing in your answers to change your text color for me. And then also we have some vocabulary we're supposed to use. It was on the previous slide, I believe, that as you answer all of these questions, there are 7 vocab terms that I want you to use and highlight within your answers. I have put those vocab terms down here in the notes as well, so that you don't always have to flip back to that slide with the vocab list on it. So this is in every single speaker notes section on the slide. So go ahead and refer to those. And if you could use some of those words, I definitely see at least one word you're going to be able to use. So just remember to use those as well. All right, going back to our reading. It is a much longer reading, so I might need to break this section into 2, but we'll see how it goes. What was the Renaissance? The Renaissance began in Italy in the 1300s and spread to other parts of Europe in the 1400s and 1500s. Let's look more closely at this great rebirth of interest in classical art and learning. Then we will explore the link between the Renaissance and the classical world. So just looking at our definitions right here as well, it says, okay, the Renaissance, a great flowering of culture based on classical Greek and Roman ideas and art that began in Italy in the late Middle Ages and spread throughout Europe. So this is pretty much just what the paragraph said. Classical art is art influenced by the styles and techniques of ancient Greece and Rome. All right, next section, renewed interest, or part of the section, renewed interest in the classical world. The Renaissance began with the rediscovery of the classical world of ancient Greece and Rome. After the fall of Rome in the 5th century Common Era, classical culture was never entirely forgotten. Clergy of the Roman Catholic Church helped keep knowledge of ancient times alive by copying documents that survived from the classical period. Sounds like one of the answers to me. Still, this knowledge reached relatively few people during the Middle Ages. In the late Middle Ages, merchants and crusaders brought back goods and ideas from the East, including classical learning that had been preserved in the Byzantine Empire. Europeans also read classical works that came to them from Muslim scholars. Sounds like other answers to me. You guys remember the Byzantine Empire? That is the Roman Empire that survived in the East. So like in modern day Turkey, the Western Roman Empire fell in 476, but the Eastern Roman Empire survived and they renamed themselves the Byzantine Empire. So what this is saying is that during the Crusades, in the late Middle Ages, merchants and crusaders brought back goods and ideas from the East. And remember, they're going through the Byzantine Empire to get to the Holy Land. And so they have access to all of those things. This flow of ideas led to the rediscovery of Greek and Roman culture. That sounds like another answer as well. Scholars started collecting and reading ancient manuscripts from monasteries. Artists and architects studied classical statues and buildings. The renewed interest in classical culture led to the great flowering of art and learning that we called the Renaissance. So right here appears like our third cause, and then right here is going to be the effect right? And that includes one of your vocab terms, so make sure you highlight it when you put it in your answer. Exploring the rebirth of classical ideas through art. Okay, before I get into this section, at this point you should have been able to answer all of this, so you might want to pause the video to answer these questions. And then the rest of section 2 is going to be looking at different art from the different time periods. So the directions for this slide are, as you continue or as you read the subsection in your book entitled Exploring the Rebirth of Classical Ideas Through Art, fill in the first 2 rows of the matrix below. So you're filling out this chart. When you read about classical art, you'll write, okay, what's the purpose of classical art? And then you'll fill in 2 style characteristics of each example in your book. So what are 2 characteristics of classical art? Then when we read the section about medieval art, you'll fill that in right here and then put 2 examples. And then Renaissance art, you'll put the purpose here and then fill in 2 examples. Again, if you can use any of the vocab terms here, remember to highlight them in your answer and to change your text color as a whole. Okay, returning to the reading. Oops. We can trace the link between the classical world and the Renaissance by looking at art. Let's explore some of the characteristics of art from classical, medieval, and Renaissance times. You guys are going to become like art historians right now, so it's going to be cool. We're going to look at art and the different purposes and techniques in that art. So right here already we could see in this picture, this Roman copy of a Greek statue was created in 450 BCE. A discus thrower. It celebrates the classical ideals of athleticism, balance, and power. So this statue is showing an athlete. They still throw the discus in track and field today, and it's from it's interesting. It's a Roman copy of a Greek statue. So this isn't even the original of the statue. All right, let's learn about classical art. The classical period lasted from about 500 before Common Era to 500 Common Era, so that's about 1,000 years. The classical artists of Greece and Rome created sculptures, pottery, murals, and mosaics. The purpose of much of their art was to show the importance of ordinary people and civic leaders, so people in the government, as well as gods and goddesses. Here are additional characteristics of classical art. So right here, here's your purpose. You could type that in your chart already. And then here are additional characteristics of classical art. You can type in any 2 of these that you want. So artists valued balance and harmony, meaning that their paintings or their sculptures were balanced and harmonious, peaceful. Figures were lifelike, but often idealized or more perfect than in real life. So yes, they look like people, but they're like the ideal version of people. Figures were nude or draped in togas or robes, so not much modesty. They did have nude figures in paintings and sculptures, or if they were wearing clothing, they were wearing togas or robes of some sort. Next. Bodies looked active and motion was believable. So we could definitely see that in this figure. He's doing a sport. He's throwing the discus, but yes, he's active, but it looks believable as well. Continuing on, faces were calm and without emotion. We could see that in this example as well. His face is calm. He's not really showing any emotion like fear or excitement or sadness or happiness. It's just very calm and very little emotion. Scenes showed either heroic figures or real people doing tasks from daily life. So this figure is kind of like an everyday person, but also an athlete. So it kind of combines these 2. So in most artwork of classical art, though, it's usually going to be someone heroic or a real person doing something from their daily life. And then lastly, in paintings, there was little background or sense of perspective. Perspective is a visual technique used to make people and objects look closer or farther away and to give realistic depth to a scene. So we can't see it in this example because this is a statue and this is talking about paintings. Perspective is in like 2-dimensional things or flat things. It's what gives the idea that there's depth to it, like things look farther away or closer. So what this is saying is in classical art, they didn't really have a sense of perspective. They didn't make things look farther and closer. And they also didn't really put a background in their paintings usually. So now go ahead and answer the questions on the slide for classical art. And once I looked at the directions more closely, you write the purpose in the first box, which is up here. And then when it says to do two characteristics, you're actually doing two characteristics from here that are shown in this example. So because this is a statue, you obviously wouldn't write this characteristic because that's for paintings. But any of these things that you think fit this statue, and we talked about some of them and I pointed to the statue, write down two of those. I would pause this video right now and go ahead and fill out that part of the notes before we move on to the next part of this section. Okay, next, looking at medieval art. So here's our example of medieval art right here. It says, this example of medieval art was created for a church in France in 1120 Common Era. It shows Jesus sending his apostles out to preach. So Jesus and his apostles. Medieval art. The medieval period lasted from about 500 to about 1300. Medieval artists created stained glass windows, sculptures, illuminated manuscripts, paintings, and tapestries. The purpose of much medieval art was to teach religion to people who could not read or write. Here are the additional characteristics of medieval art. So already here's our purpose. Remember that during medieval times, people were very religious. The religion was Christianity. And so really at this point, the purpose of medieval artwork is to teach people about Christianity when most people can't read or write, but they could understand pictures. And again, this is for during the medieval time period from about 500 to 1300. So the characteristics of medieval art. Most art was religious, showing Jesus, saints, and people from the Bible. And we could see that in this one. We have Jesus and the apostles, or who are the followers of Jesus. Most figures in paintings were shown larger than others around them. We definitely see that in this example. Jesus is larger than the other figures around him. And it's not that he was super tall. It's that's how they showed the main figure, and then all the other figures would be smaller normally. Figures looked stiff with little sense of movement. Figures were fully dressed in stiff-looking clothing. We could see both of these. So the figures do look stiff. They look kind of posed, not like they're moving naturally. And all of the figures you could see are fully dressed in clothing. So that's different from classical art. Faces were serious and showed little expression. We could see, if you could kind of try to see their faces, and in paintings too, you could see faces better. They are very serious. They don't really show much expression. Painted figures looked two-dimensional or flat. So that's not what this example is, because this example is more of a carving. It's not a painting. But if we were to look at a medieval painting, again, it does not have perspective, just like classical art. It looks two-dimensional or flat. However, in medieval art, paint colors were usually very bright, and we can kind of see that here. And even though this is like a sculpture, it looks like it's above doors maybe. I'm not sure. We could see that this part is a bright color, and if you were to look at a painting, you would see bright colors in the painting. And then lastly, backgrounds were mostly one color in a painting. So they might do this great painting, but they didn't really put a background of like trees or buildings or anything. It would just be one solid color, normally blue or gold. Go ahead and pause this video now so that you could answer that part of the chart. Go ahead and put the purpose and two characteristics of medieval art that you see in this example. This video only records for 15 minutes, so I'm about out of time. I will make another video to go to the next section, which is going to be Renaissance art.